Yeah, and I think this is again something that separates you from a lot of conventional sort of commentators that, to my mind, seem to be still transfixed with a sort of material utilitarian sort of rationale for action, which is, we can make things better and we need to work out how to do it, and then we go and do it. And if we can't, then we don't act. And I mean, my reading and the tradition I come from is very much, my parents were Christians as well, and what have you. And the tradition that I feel like I come from is there's there's a good way to live your life, and that's all you can do. You can't you can't expect anything more. This life doesn't owe you anything. And I I think what's sad, I guess, is that we've lost because we've had things so good for so many people, I guess, in the West anyway, we've sort of lost hold of what that actually means. And I'm just wondering whether, the first time I saw your videos, I was quite shocked because I felt like you were talking directly to me because you were sort of, you were referring back to some traditions that really don't get referred to. And I feel personally like we need to reconnect with some of those historical philosophies or ways of life or ways of resistance. And I was wondering, maybe to just finish off, you can talk a little bit about what you think those main philosophies or ways of being are, that younger people today can learn from.
Well, you're right. As soon as, I would say both for revolutionaries and for the religious, the practical is irrelevant. Hannah Arendt said, don't trust people who say this shouldn't be done or this oughtn't to be done. Only trust those people who say I can't. It's not about what's practical. It's about what's right. And I think that when you take what you believe, and so far as you can determine it, as a moral stance, and you don't pay a cost, then it's probably not that moral. But I think for the revolutionary, the radical, and ultimately the religious, it does come down to, as Arendt said, I mean, I can't. It's what's right or wrong, no matter what the consequences are. And not only that, but it's right or wrong, no matter what the outcome is, even if the outcome, at least in the short term, appears to be detrimental to what you say and want. Life's short. You learn that in war. And in the end, you want to look back and, not regret that you didn't stand up, not regret that you were crippled by fear or self-interest, that your life meant something. I mean, that comes down to the fundamental question of what constitutes a life of meaning. And, as Faulkner said, every life viewed from the inside is a failure. We're all, in that sense, failures. But I know that, Auden said these ironic points of light that flash out wherever the just exchange their messages. I mean, I am propelled forward by these figures like my father who stood up at personal cost in the past. I can't betray them, and I won't betray them. And they allow me to define what is a life of meaning for me, even if the rest of society not only doesn't recognize it, but even attempts to negate it. And I think that is the power of, we would say, bearing witness, doing what is right. That there is, I mean, Berrigan became a close friend before he died. The great radical priest burned draft records with homemade napalm and then stood there praying until they arrested him, put him in a federal prison for 23 months, broke into nuclear sites and poured his blood over weapons. He just wouldn't stop. And when you have those kinds of bonds, those kinds of relationships, and especially as you age, as I'm aging, in many ways, their presence becomes more real than the presence of people around you. They're constantly, I mean, it's very close to the theologian James Cone, who we just lost. America, hands down, America's greatest theologian. His book, The Cross and the Lynching Tree, is stunning, where he condemns the white church and white theologians for never denouncing lynching, which they never did, No theologian ever mentioned it. And he talks about lynching as a modern form of crucifixion, because remember, they lynched children. And he said, there it was, the crucifixion right in front of them, and the church couldn't see it. And he talks about that commitment to the crucified of the earth. And that's our role, that we are to stand with the crucified of the earth, and that when you truly stand with the oppressed, ultimately you will be treated like the oppressed. And of course, that is the greatest validation of a life.